Hello, Sunny Hill. It is Friday. You made it. You made it Friday. Go you. And it's great to be together again for our final time in the book of Matthew with me. Someone else is going to come and do the rest, don't worry. But today we are in Matthew 5, looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and it's a phenomenal passage. The whole of chapter 5 is just epic. And so I hope you really enjoy reading it. I was really challenged with what to talk about today because there's so much in it that I could look at. But I felt a particular call to look at verse 43 onwards in the bit in my Bible is entitled Love for Your Enemies. It's real challenging, isn't it? And the whole of this Sermon on the Mount basically is trying to call the people of God to live differently, recognizing that actually the way we live represents God in the world. And so if the standard is here, I'm going to call you to live here, actually, because this better represents God's character and God's nature. So where you think this is the bar, we're going for here, because actually God is even more gracious, even more kind, even more loving, even more good than maybe we've set the bar to understand. And so in this passage here, he says, you've heard it said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So don't just love them, but pray for them. It's really hard, real big call to do even more than maybe we thought was the standard. And I was really interested in verse 46. It says, and if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? As if it's easy to love people who are lovable, and it's easy to love people who love you. Like, that's the easiest part. The hardest bit is to love people who are unlovable or who definitely don't love you. And actually that's what the reward is. Now, Matthew doesn't go into what the reward is, but Luke does. So don't tell Kevin. We're off to Luke again. Sorry, Matthew, but Luke's got this in chapter 6. He says, in the same sort of teaching from Jesus, he says, then your reward will be great. When you love your enemies and do good to them, then your reward will be great, because you will be sons of the Most High. And I think basically what Jesus is saying in this moment is that you get to represent Jesus and you get to represent God. And that actually the living in this area rather than this area makes you look more like him. You more identify as his child. You, as Dom has said before, you have your father's eyes when you live in this way, because this is who he is, or even beyond that, to be honest, but this is who he is. So doing it down here, living a life that is like everybody else, tolerating people. Some people think that they're good people just if they don't gossip, or if they don't undermine, or if they don't sabotage people. But actually, we're not only called to not do those things, we're also called to love them and pray for them. And when we do so, we get the reward of looking more like God to the world. It's quite a powerful picture. It ends, this whole passage ends, the chapter 5 ends by saying in verse 48, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Wow, that's a big statement, isn't it? Be perfect. The word perfect here is teleos. And what teleos means, this word means whole and complete. And I think basically God's aware, and Jesus is speaking here, that the love that the world shows is very broken, it's very divided, it's very fractured, and there's strings attached to it always. And God's requirement of us as his followers, as Jesus followers, is to actually be whole in the way that we love. Not being divided, not being fractured, but being complete and able to do it in the fullness of what love looks like, which means loving like God. And as he says here, he makes the sun rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. He is indiscriminate with how he loves. And so are we called to do that. So I'm going to ask you to do a really hard thing today in our final time together. As we move into a time of prayer now, I want you to think of someone who you really struggle to love. It might be someone in your family. It might be someone at your workplace. It might be someone who lives on your street, or who's bullying your kid at school, or whatever. It might be someone that's really, really difficult. You feel like you've got a good reason to not love them and not pray for them. And maybe right now you're just working on tolerating being in the same space as them. Well, that's here. God's called us to live here. So I'm going to encourage you to spend some time now as we move into a posture of prayer, bringing that person before God. And it might be that for a little while you can't say too much in prayer for that person, but as you continue to pray, maybe your ability to stretch that prayer of blessing, that prayer of provision over them, and that actually, it will best represent God to the world, best make you look more like Jesus as you choose to extend love to even the people who are most difficult to love. So I hope that you are going to take this challenge today. I'm going to go and do it now because there's people in my life that I struggle to love. And so I'm going to go and pray for them right now. And I hope you join me in it. Have a great day. I'll see you on Sunday.